In 1937, as Japan expanded its empire across Asia, the Imperial Japanese Navy grew confident that it could dominate the Pacific. Their aircraft, their training methods, and their aggressive military strategy gave them early success. But by 1943, the situation had changed drastically. Japan's industry was weakening, their fuel reserves were shrinking, and their veteran pilots were being lost faster than they could be replaced. The United States, in contrast, was growing stronger each month. More ships were launched, better aircraft entered service, and new technologies appeared on the battlefield. The balance of power had shifted, and Japan was running out of options. By the middle of 1944, American forces began advancing toward the Philippines. Japan feared that if the Philippines were lost, their access to resources from Southeast Asia would be cut off completely. This fear led to what would become one of the most desperate tactics in military history. Japan created a special attack corps, composed mostly of young, inexperienced pilots. Their weapon was their aircraft itself, used as a guided missile. These pilots were ordered to crash directly into American warships at high speed. They were named Kamikaze, meaning divine wind. Their mission was to trade their lives for a single American ship. At first, Japan believed this tactic could change the war. Early kamikaze attacks achieved some success. American fire control systems were designed to hit aircraft that tried to escape, not pilots determined to hit the ship no matter what. A single successful crash could kill hundreds of sailors and disable a warship instantly. But the United States was preparing a countermeasure long before the first official kamikaze strike took place. In secret laboratories, American scientists were developing a revolutionary device for naval artillery shells. It was called the Proximity Fuze, also known as the VT fuse, short for variable time. This fuse did not require the shell to hit its target. Instead, it used miniature radio waves to detect when it was close to an aircraft and detonate at the correct distance. This innovation gave American guns a greater chance of destroying incoming aircraft in a single shot. But the U.S. Navy could not reveal this weapon too early. If Japan discovered how it worked, they might develop a counter-strategy. Therefore, in 1944, the Proximity Fuze was kept highly classified and used only in special operations. That would soon change. During the Ka-Puratam Battle of Leyte Gulf. In October 1944, Japan launched the first large kamikaze operations. These attacks targeted American escort carriers and destroyers. Ships like the USS St. Lo were struck and sunk. The Americans realized that this new tactic was more dangerous than any previous air attack. Reports from U.S. naval commanders requested permission to release proximity-fused ammunition to more ships. The request was approved. From late 1944 onward, American naval forces in the Pacific began receiving large supplies of proximity-fused shells, particularly for the widely used 5-inch anti-aircraft guns aboard destroyers, battleships, and carriers. As kamikaze attacks increased, American defenses transformed rapidly. Radar detected incoming planes earlier, and proximity fuses increased hit probability enormously. Japanese pilots who once expected to reach their targets suddenly found themselves destroyed at a distance. In early 1945, kamikaze operations intensified as the U.S. closed in on Okinawa, Japan's last defense perimeter before the home islands. Over 1,900 kamikaze aircraft were deployed in the Okinawa campaign alone. Japan hoped that mass suicide attacks could break the American invasion force. However, the United States was now fully prepared. Warships formed powerful defensive rings, each armed with radar-controlled guns firing proximity-fused shells. U.S. commanders noticed the difference immediately. Enemy aircraft were being destroyed farther away from the fleet and in larger numbers than ever before. Japanese intelligence reports began describing the American anti-aircraft fire as extraordinary. Pilots reported explosions near their aircraft without being hit by visible bullets. Many planes simply disintegrated in mid-air. Commanders tried different flight angles and altitudes, but the results did not improve. Kamikaze attacks still caused damage, but their success rate declined sharply. During the Okinawa campaign alone, U.S. guns equipped with Proximity Fuses were credited with destroying hundreds of attacking aircraft. In official post-war analysis, the Proximity Fuse was identified as one of the primary reasons kamikaze tactics failed to achieve their expected impact. By the summer of 1945, Japan's situation was beyond recovery. Fuel was nearly gone. Aircraft production was collapsing. New pilots were rushed through minimal training, and most importantly, the Americans now possessed a defense system capable of neutralizing mass suicide attacks. Japan had hoped that determination, sacrifice, and the kamikaze strategy could force the United States to negotiate peace. Instead, they learned that technology had changed modern warfare. Courage alone could not defeat scientific advancement, the proximity. Fuse did not win the Pacific War by itself, but it ensured that Japan's last major tactic, the kamikaze, would not succeed in stopping the American advance toward Japan. This is how a single piece of technology helped save thousands of American sailors and signaled the approaching end of one of history's most violent wars. By July 1945, the United States Navy had transformed into a fully prepared defense machine. Every major fleet unit sailed with powerful radar systems and proximity-fused shells. These weapons became the final barrier against Japan's last remaining strategy, the kamikaze. The effectiveness of the proximity fuse was now undeniable. During multiple engagements near Okinawa, U.S. warships reported shooting down incoming aircraft at far greater distances than before. Radar detected the threat earlier. The fire control system calculated the trajectory instantly, and the newly developed shells exploded when close enough to destroy or cripple the target. American sailors noticed that there were fewer moments of panic aboard their ships. The sudden, violent dives of enemy aircraft still created fear, but there was now confidence in the defensive system. The success rates were recorded with strong statistical evidence. Proximity fuses increased anti-aircraft effectiveness by nearly 400% during late-war operations. Japanese pilots also noticed the change. As the war progressed, many kamikaze pilots were students from military academies or even universities. They understood the scientific developments taking place in the world. Some of them questioned why they were going into battle with outdated aircraft, little training, and no realistic chance of survival. Reports from captured Japanese aviators described a growing fear of American defense technology. The unexplained mid-air explosions terrified those who witnessed them. Japanese strategists attempted to analyze the situation. They suspected that Americans had created a new timed fuse or a type of airburst shell, but they didn't know the technology used inside. They did not understand that tiny radio transmitters were built into each shell, a scientific accomplishment far ahead of anything Japanese factories could produce under wartime shortages. As more kamikaze missions failed, the Japanese High Command shifted focus toward quantity rather than quality. Hundreds of inexperienced pilots were deployed in rapid waves. They hoped that if enough aircraft were launched, some would break through the American defenses. However, by this point, Japan's limited fuel supply severely restricted training flights. Many kamikaze pilots flew their first and final combat mission on the same day. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy continued to expand its technological advantage. Escort ships like destroyers formed a defensive perimeter around aircraft carriers. Heavy cruisers and battleships sat behind them, adding more layers of artillery coverage. The result was one of the most formidable anti-aircraft networks in naval history. One American admiral remarked, "If they come, we will see them. If we see them, we will hit them." This confidence did not eliminate the danger. Kamikaze aircraft still managed to strike ships on several occasions, causing significant casualties. But these were exceptions rather than expectations. In the final months of the war, Japanese pilots found it increasingly difficult to even approach the American fleet. As the U.S. closed in on the Ryukyu Islands, desperation in Tokyo reached extreme levels. Plans were developed for a massive suicide defense of the Japanese home islands. Thousands of aircraft were hidden in underground shelters and cave hangars, waiting for the invasion. Japan believed that this final battle could inflict losses so high that the United States might negotiate peace. But these plans never came to pass. 2 atomic bombs were dropped, first on Hiroshima, then on Nagasaki. Japan faced a situation from which it could not recover. The Emperor announced surrender on August 15, 1945, ending the Second World War. After the war, Allied authorities studied the kamikaze tactic in great detail. Psychological motivations, training methods, and aircraft designs were analyzed. But one major conclusion stood out. Suicide attacks failed to produce the strategic results Japan needed. American technology had simply moved too far ahead. The Proximity Fuze was later described by U.S. military leaders as one of the most important inventions of World War II, ranking alongside radar and the atomic bomb. Without it, the casualty numbers during the Pacific War, especially at Okinawa, could have been dramatically higher. Even the British Royal Navy adopted the technology and used it in the European theater. Proximity fuses helped counter the German V-1 flying bomb threat and protected shipping lanes during late war operations. Years later, former Japanese officers acknowledged the challenge they faced. They admitted that the Americans possessed a level of electronic and industrial capability far beyond Japan's reach. Kamikaze tactics demonstrated bravery and nationalism, but bravery alone could not overcome advanced science. The legacy of the Proximity Fuze extended beyond the war. It marked the beginning of electronic warfare and guided munitions. The principles developed for these fuses would eventually evolve into missile proximity sensors, anti-aircraft defense systems, and space-oriented tracking technology. The story of the Kamikaze and the Proximity Fuze is a powerful example of how warfare changed during the 20th century. It shows that determination and sacrifice can influence a battlefield, but technology can redefine the limits of what is possible. The Pacific War ended not only because of overwhelming numbers and firepower, but also because of innovations that ensured every American weapon was more effective. While Japanese pilots gave everything in their final missions, the unseen advancements inside American shells helped bring the conflict to a close. This was the final chapter of Japan's suicide air campaign, a dramatic struggle between human sacrifice and scientific progress, and a reminder that in modern war, the battle for survival is often decided long before the enemy appears in the sky.